Nintendo's being shitty again, and I think we have to talk about it. For once, I have real context to add. I've been deep in these circles for a while, and it's time to share my knowledge a little bit because I'm frustrated. Nintendo is so annoyingly anti-gamer and anti-games preservation sometimes. It's genuinely horrifying. Quick context, Yuzu is the most popular Switch emulator by quite a bit. It's the best way to play Switch games on things that aren't the Switch, which includes, but is not limited to, PCs, MacBooks, and also the Steam Deck, which, yeah, I can see why Nintendo's not super happy about Yuzu. Historically, they haven't been too bad about it, though, which is weird because Nintendo tends to go after these things whenever they can. Here, they're reaching, and it's quite frustrating. There are some comments in this preliminary statement that genuinely horrify me. This is your typical boring legal doc, but I want to find a couple specific things in here. The big one here is the claim that this is to help piracy. Nintendo designed the Switch with very sophisticated security measures or technological measures, sometimes referred to as TPMs, meant to prevent people from playing unauthorized or pirate copies of Nintendo's video games, whether on the Switch console or on other consoles. They call out that every game has a bunch of cryptography in it in order to keep it unique. And the Switch console has certain keys available called the prod keys to decrypt and play those games. It's a long string they have that is used to check that the game is the game and the Switch is the Switch, and they've copywritten that set of characters that are effectively a key. It's a key that you can copy and paste, but it's a key, and they're claiming that any use of that outside of the Switch you purchased it on is illegal. Here's one of the many examples of the reaches in this that I am incredibly frustrated about. As to piracy, for instance, one recent major Nintendo video game, Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, was unlawfully distributed a week and a half before its release by Nintendo. Infringing copies of this game that circulated online were able to be played in Yuzu, and the copies were successfully downloaded from pirate websites over 1 million times before the game was published and made for lawful purchase by Nintendo. There are like 7+ ways in which this is stupid, so I'm going to break down my favorites. My personal favorite is that I'm one of the people who played this game a week and a half early. I had almost beat the game by the time it was out. I have a Switch that is hacked because Nintendo released the original Nintendo Switch with the ability to stuff a little piece of metal in the side in the Joy-Con slot to short it into boot mode, and then you could choose what it boots to, and you could install custom firmware, and now you have a Switch that can play anything, anytime. I did that because I like playing these games early, I like backing up my saves, and I'm deep in like the Pokemon hacking community because it's genuinely fun for me. The issue here is that I play these games early, the way they're stating here. I also don't play them on Yuzu, which is the issue they're stating here. In fact, I would imagine a significant portion of people playing these pirated games are playing them on hacked Switches. And also, I had already bought the game. Yes, I had it pre-ordered. I'd been waiting for it for a while. And the ability to play it early does not exclusively mean I'm no longer paying for it. So the presumption being made here that 1 million downloads means $60 million they didn't make in sales is absolute fucking bullshit. And the implication here that Yuzu is somehow making this more common or more likely, or is the reason that 1 million copies were downloaded, is at best bad faith. Many of the pirate websites specifically noted the ability to play the game file in Yuzu. Cool. People weren't always playing it in Yuzu. You can't go after them because the thing that is a reasonable backup of the software can be used in things built to play the software. It's been solidified in court many times that emulators are legal, Nintendo, and you've found weird ways to work around that since. The most recent one that drove me mad was the Dolphin stuff. If some of you are not familiar with Dolphin, it's an emulator for GameCube and Wii games. It's the emulator for GameCube and Wii games. It's an incredible piece of technology, emulating that kind of weird PowerPC system on everything. Like you can play Dolphin on an Android phone and it runs pretty good. That's nuts. Really genuinely impressive technical work. There are like whole documentaries about how Dolphin simulated weird GPU behaviors just to make one game, Metroid Prime, work. I don't know how to say it other than it's an engineering marvel. It's one of those rare pieces of software that has so much care and thought put into every detail of how it works because they love the system and the games that Nintendo's no longer supporting and they want to help maintain it. One of the things they did to try and share it more was putting it on Steam. Sadly, Nintendo DMCA'd them at that point. The reason for it, though, is where things get weird. Because again, remember, emulators are legal. This has been determined for a while, all the way back in the PS1 days. So how did they get hit here? Because they did everything right. They built an emulator that was a full from scratch, like green room recreation of how the GameCube and Wii worked, reverse engineered from how the games behaved. Nothing there is illegal except for one dumb detail. Here's the call out. Again, Nintendo stupid legal speak. The Dolphin emulator is designed solely to play Wii and Nintendo GameCube games. Nintendo owns or exclusively controls copyright in Wii and Nintendo GameCube games and authorizes third-party licensees who develop thousands more. Nintendo authorizes these games to be played solely on their native consoles. Those Those first three sentences, I can confidently say, and I'm not a lawyer, but from everything I know about this stuff, these three sentences hold no water in court. The way the emulator is designed, the copyright Nintendo has over the games, and the licenses they've authorized, and the focus on authorization being solely for their consoles, none of that matters. The courts have ruled very clearly in the United States that these three sentences mean literally nothing legally speaking. It's the thing they wanted to do, but it's not legal. So let's read this fourth sentence, because that's where things fall apart. To protect Nintendo and its third-party licensees' copyrighted work, Nintendo places certain technological measures on its consoles and games. Getting interesting now. These include, amongst other things, the encryption on Wii and Nintendo GameCube consoles and games that effectively protect against unauthorized access and copying of those copywritten games, and inherently the ability to play those games on an unauthorized console. So how do they work around this? Well, the Wii and Nintendo game files, or ROMs, are encrypted using proprietary cryptographic keys. The Dolphin emulator operates by incorporating these cryptographic keys without Nintendo's authorization and decrypting the ROMs at or immediately before runtime. And here is the problem. This is a copyright act call they're making. So what's the copyright? Well, remember what I mentioned before, the key thing? Turns out the way that Nintendo keeps you from just writing a blank DVD and putting it in your Wii and having it work is that the actual contents of that DVD are signed cryptographically, which means that all of the data on that disc is shifted. If you've seen like the Pig Latin or what's the Caesar cipher, there's a lot of these concepts, and the way that you could think of it is you're shifting the numbers or the letters over in some way. If I want to say hello, but I don't want others to know it's hello, I could advance every letter back one. So instead of H, it would be I. Instead of E, it would be F. Instead of L, it would be O twice. You get the idea. You can do these types of things to shift the data such that it's unrecognizable until you've shifted it back. And the thing you use to shift it back is called an encryption key. In this case, the encryption key is a very small string. A string is just some text. There is debate as to whether or not what Dolphin did here still falls within the interoperability carve-out that exists for people making things that are interoperable with external purchases they've made, like in this case, a game, which again, has been carved out as a thing that you can safely, legally do. You can make emulators for systems. Nintendo is claiming specifically that the inclusion of this little chunk here, these keys, this text, the things it points to, the common key, as they say here, is type secret key, subtype AES, and then these characters. This set of data, which is used again to take the content of the disk and shift it in the right place so that the console can read it. This being here is the thing they're saying is illegal. Theoretically, as far as I and anybody I've seen has said, if this wasn't included here at all, Nintendo would have no case. If this was a file you had to go download, Nintendo would have no case. Kind of been the case in the past with things like Game Boy emulation, where the Game Boy BIOS, which is the software that exists on the Game Boy itself, if you had the file that included all that, the famous GBA BIOS.bin, distributing that was something Nintendo could sue you for, but distributing MGBA or other GBA emulators, they couldn't. It seems like they're really fixated on this key because they have claimed that this is their intellectual property and that circumventing it or including it is a violation of copyright law. They are using DMCA. It's not a takedown request. It's a cease and desist. It's we think you're violating the law, so don't do this. I don't know if I've mentioned this before or not, but it's important to know that this isn't Nintendo sending a notice to Dolphin. This is Nintendo sending a notice to Steam saying to not distribute Dolphin, because the legality of that code is still up for debate, but Nintendo believes the distribution of that code through a platform like Steam, not Dolphin itself to be clear, just this specific set of characters here, that these being on Steam for Valve to distribute and potentially profit from, that is the thing they believe is illegal. They don't have any real case against Valve. They could have a case against Dolphin for using Valve's platform in that way. As such, they're telling Valve, hey, we think this thing's illegal. You shouldn't let them do it. And Valve, not wanting to get into some shit, complied. This was also not that long ago. This was about 9 months ago now, and this had slowed down. And as per usual, they tried to sneak this out during other big Nintendo news. In this case, the huge Pokemon conference that happened the morning of this announcement. The timing feels suspicious. It's hard to account for those things because the legal team and the Nintendo Game Freak team are far away enough that this probably isn't planned. It's hard to not feel that way sometimes. One more big quote from Nintendo's awful doc here. In other words, without Yuzu's decryption of Nintendo's encryption, authorized copies of games could not be played on PCs or Android devices. Similar to how things happened with the GameCube emulator, there is a code that is used to shift the data from the disk such that you can play the game. And just doing that shift, just having the data to do that shift, is considered illegal by Nintendo. And as such, they don't believe there is a legal way to play a Switch game on a PC or on an Android device. Okay, so really quick correction. When I finished filming this, something just didn't sit right from my knowledge of Yuzu and the hacking scene for the Switch, so I decided to look into it. It turns out they're not distributing a decryption key. They know better, which makes sense. They know what they're doing. In the Getting Started guide on the Yuzu site that I've just taken a look at, the instructions give you a lot of things here that you wouldn't think you'd need for just running an emulator. But the key part here is that they're teaching you how to play commercial games, which in order to do that, you have to get the keys from your Switch yourself. They don't provide any of this at all. They're not even doing the thing Dolphin did before. I can't imagine this being considered them in the wrong. They're teaching you how to get the key from one of your Switch devices that is able to be exploited in the way where you can do this, which is again, an NVIDIA exploit, such that you can get the file off of your Switch and use that on your device. Could you go find someone else's file somewhere else on the internet? Probably, but they are explicitly not teaching you how to do that. They are explicitly teaching you how to get this data off of your Switch. And this is not a short guide, by the way. This is the actual getting starting guide for Yuzu, which again, I wouldn't have known because I don't use Yuzu, I just play on my Switch. But as I understand and as I've described in the rest of this video, they're not doing anything wrong here. The fact that they have used copyright law to circumvent the ability for people to build alternative interfaces and solutions to use things that they've purchased is explicitly illegal and has been for a while. So this is kind of bullshit. And I am curious to see if Yuzu can get enough support to actually challenge it in court, because there is almost no way this can stand as far as I understand. Once again, not a lawyer, just sharing what I know from seeing these things play out in the past. Seems like Nintendo is overstepping by claiming that the production keys that they're using for decrypting games are illegal. I have my production keys for my Switch. I got them when I decrypted my Switch, when I hacked it. Those are things that I have that are mine that aren't illegal because I purchased the Switch and I have them. The idea that this set of text, that this small set of numbers is copyrightable so much so that it runs in the face of existing carve-outs for us to own and use our devices just feels absurd on its face because it kind of is. In effect, Yuzu turns general computing devices into tools for massive intellectual property infringement of Nintendo and others' copyrighted works. And I would argue again, like some of these points sound really bad, but are actually just not true. Nothing stops a user from obtaining and playing unlawful copies of virtually any game made for the Nintendo Switch, all without paying a dime to Nintendo or to any of the hundreds of other game devs and publishers making and selling games for the Switch. Here's another fun fact, Nintendo. Nothing stops you from taking a game away from me that I purchased. This is the current crisis in games, is that when a studio shuts down or a company shuts down or they decide to shutter the PS3 or Xbox original game stores, there are games there that go away forever when that happens. The number of games that I played as a kid that I'll never get to show my own children because GameSpy shut down is horrifying. And my ability to recreate and replay the things that I purchased is something that is encoded in law and protected. The idea that I could buy a VCR tape that is licensed only for Philips players, and then Philips stops making VCRs, and if I can't find another Philips VCR, I can never play this tape again, even if somebody else makes a new type of VCR that can play it. This is so frustrating. I'll make the spicy argument that a big part of why they're doing this more and more is because they've fallen so behind on quality of experience. Like the Switch is a bad tablet processor from 2014 that they put in a 2017 gaming console that they've been selling for another 7 years since. The hardware in there is 11 plus years old. Nintendo hasn't made a console that's more powerful since the Wii. The Wii U was literally 3 Wiis strapped together. It's insane. It's actually insane that Nintendo is not competing and it is instead suing people who are fans of their work. The one thing in here that I'm going to see cited and is going to just piss me off is that they're citing their case against good old Gary Bowser, which if you guys don't know, it's one of the worst reported cases of all time. Good old Bowser owes Nintendo 10 million, which sounds absurd that this poor Nintendo hacker that just wanted to make their games accessible is getting charged that much money. Gary is not your usual like freedom-loving Nintendo hacker. He was part of an awful group named Exeggutor. Their thing was, God, Exeggutor is the worst. They were one of the earliest Switch hacking groups. And rather than open sourcing their software and helping foster a good homebrew community, which is what usually happens with Nintendo consoles and hacking, they charged for their custom firmware and access to their hacked store. So they were charging you a monthly subscription for access to their pirated library. And if you stopped paying or tried installing it for free, they'd brick your shit. They were well known for bricking consoles that tried to circumvent their hacks and their attempts to charge you, which is hilarious when you think about it. That a company that lets you get Nintendo things for free by stealing them would break your hardware if you stopped paying them. Exeggutor is shit. I am actually happy Bowser got struck down. He should not have been this successful. He should not have been able to make this much money selling someone else's software illegally. This is not a comparable case. And the fact that a bad faith actor taking advantage of an opportunity that they had as the novel hackers who got there as far this fast, using it to charge money to circumvent your service, absolutely, this obviously needs to be illegal. That is very, very different from a free and open source project that is working hard to prevent the loss of these games over time. What happened with Gary and Exeggutor has nothing to do with what we're discussing here, because nobody in the Yuzu ecosystem is selling anything. They're not trying to be a paid alternative to buying the games legally. They're not trying to offer people a cheaper way to illegally access things such that the original creators get nothing. Because when somebody bought a game through the Exeggutor bullshit, the developers got nothing. This isn't that. The example they gave of Zelda was a thing I ended up purchasing and probably convincing many others to purchase. And part of why I could do that is I had access to it a bit early. It's so incredibly bad faith to go after things the way they have, to cite the things that make no sense, and most importantly, to pretend that somebody making an open source way to preserve their games is doing the same thing as someone illegally selling your pirated copies of those games. These are different worlds, and putting them together is embarrassing. I genuinely thought Yuzu was as clear as could be because they weren't doing any of those types of things. And that's why I kept my mouth shut during the Gary Bowser case, because I was annoyed that people were defending him. I saw an awful article that's like, I don't even want to find it, but I've seen some really dumb stuff defending Gary and saying Nintendo's evil and ruining his life for no reason. No. Gary Bowser's a fucking asshole. This isn't about Gary Bowser. This is about open source and preservation of games. So I am 100% on Yuzu's team. I am genuinely disappointed Nintendo went after them, and I hope they get enough representation to keep this from going any further, because Yuzu, as far as I can possibly understand, is fully within their legal rights to do everything they have done. Not only that, I think they are important for the preservation of important, groundbreaking pieces of software and pieces of art that Nintendo has no intention of preserving. Until next time, peace, nerds.